I'm Elif. I want to tell you about something that happened to me, an experience that still sends shivers down my spine. After graduating from university, I moved to a small town in America, looking for a fresh start. I'd started a new job there and made some wonderful new friends, like Jessica and Isabella. In the beginning, everything was going great. I loved my job and my new little house. Sometimes my friends would come over and we'd chat and have fun late into the night. I was living the excitement and peace of my new life. However, these peaceful days began to be overshadowed by a middle-aged man I started seeing almost every day in the yard of the somewhat older, more neglected-looking house directly across from mine. Whenever I looked out the window, he would be there, staring fixedly at me with a strange, blank smile on his face. When I greeted him, he wouldn't react at all, not saying a word, just continuing to stare. This situation made me seriously uncomfortable, but I tried to brush it off, thinking he's probably just a bit introverted or odd. One morning as I was getting ready for work, I realized that one of my favorite silver earrings, which I wore almost every day, was missing. I searched every corner of my room, every drawer, my jewelry box, but I couldn't find it. I had to go to work so I wouldn't be late. When I returned in the evening, the first thing I did was to look for my earring again, but it was as if the earth had swallowed it. The next day my watch, which was a gift from my mother and which I always wore, disappeared. Again, I couldn't find it even though I searched everywhere. This incident made me very anxious. On my way back from work that day, the man across the street was in his garden again, looking at me with the same annoying smile. I had the urge to go up to him and say, "Is something wrong? Why are you always looking at me?" But I couldn't work up the courage. I opened my front door, went inside, and when I reflexively looked back one last time, the man had disappeared. When I went inside, I noticed that the light was on in the small room at the very back of the house. A room I hardly ever use. I was sure I hadn't been in that room. I didn't even know where the key was. I didn't know how to turn on the light. A feeling of unease came over me. A few days later, I woke up in the early hours of the morning to a strange, deep humming sound. I realized the sound was coming from the bathroom. My heart was pounding like crazy. Trembling with fear, I got out of bed and practically on tiptoe made my way to the bathroom, only to find the hairdryer running. It was plugged in and on the highest setting. I absolutely hadn't left it like that. In fact, I hadn't even used it that day. My blood ran cold. Someone had been in my house. There could be no other explanation. In terror, without even thinking of showering, I quickly got dressed and bolted out the door. At work, I told my closest friend Jessica what had happened. She was as shocked as I was and worried about me. She tried to comfort me and offered to stay at my place that night. We went to my house together, checked everywhere carefully, but there was nothing unusual, apart from my missing belongings, of course. With Jessica staying over, nothing strange happened that night. We went to work together in the morning. Jessica said, "Maybe it's just exhaustion, Elif. Maybe you're imagining things, or perhaps you're doing some of these things without realizing it." But my mind was still on my missing items and the hairdryer that turned itself on. I couldn't agree with her. The next morning, the first morning after Jessica had gone back to her own place, I experienced one of the biggest shocks of my life. When I drew back the curtain, that man, the man I thought was my neighbor across the street, was standing in my own yard, right in front of my living room window, looking directly in at me with that same terrifying, expressionless smile. I couldn't breathe. I clapped my hand over my mouth to keep from screaming. I immediately closed the curtain. This is too much, I thought, and despite all my fear, I quickly headed for the door to confront him. When I stepped outside, the man was gone again. It was as if he had just vanished into thin air. Trembling, I went back inside, locked the door multiple times, and unsure what to do out of fear, got ready and went to work. After that day, the strange occurrences in the house became more frequent and frightening. Sometimes I'd find a glass I'd left in the kitchen on the coffee table in the living room. Other times, a window I was sure I had closed would be slightly ajar. Once I found an old rusty key that didn't belong to me on the living room sofa. It was as if someone was playing a cat and mouse game with me, slowly trying to drive me mad, to terrify me. I no longer felt safe in my own home, not at all. It felt like someone was watching me every moment, like they could appear from anywhere at any time. Especially at night, I would flinch at the slightest creak or rustle, staring at the ceiling for hours without blinking. One night, as I was sleeping, I heard someone knocking on the living room window. I was terrified. I didn't know what to do. I grabbed the first thing I could reach, one of the heavy books from my nightstand, and quietly walked towards the living room. Without even turning on the lights, I cautiously pulled back the curtain with trembling hands and looked outside. There was no one there. Just as I was thinking, I must have misheard. I heard a knock on my bedroom window this time. My heart felt like it was going to beat out of my chest. I rushed back to the room, looked out the window, but again, I saw no one. I felt like I was going to lose my mind from fear. Then, someone started banging on the front door. On tiptoe, I peeked through the peephole. Again, no one was there. This fear was too much for me. I mustered my courage, opened the door, and there he was, across the street in his own yard, looking at me and smiling that unnerving smile. I couldn't take it anymore. I was almost certain that he was the cause of all this, but I had no strength left to resist or endure. I immediately ran back inside, locked the door, and called the police. After hanging up while waiting for them to arrive, I tremblingly looked out the living room window towards the man's house. He was still there, motionlessly looking at me and smiling. I was on the verge of going insane. It was around 4 a.m. when the police finally arrived at my house. I told them everything from beginning to end, my missing belongings, the strange noises I heard in the house, the hairdryer, the light that turned on by itself, and most importantly, the constant staring and disturbing smile of the man in the house across the street. What was truly horrifying was the police officer's response. One of them said, "Mom, no one has lived in the house across from you for over 10 years. That house is completely empty." But that was impossible. I knew what I had seen. I had seen that man countless times, seen his house lights on, seen him standing in his yard. I had seen everything. The police said it was impossible, that the house was abandoned. I couldn't believe it. I didn't want to believe it. To calm me down, the police officers knocked on the door of the house across the street. No one answered. They looked through the windows. It was dark and dusty inside. "You see, the house is empty," they said. The next day, I went to the police station to give a statement. My friends, Jessica and Isabella, picked me up from there. With their encouragement, in broad daylight, we went into the yard of the man's house. When we looked through the dusty windows, we saw that the house was indeed completely empty, the furniture covered with sheets, and it was clear no one had entered for years. At that moment, my knees buckled. So, what had I seen? Who was that man? Was everything I experienced a figment of my imagination? But I know very well what I experienced and what I saw. I could not stay in that house for one more day. I hurriedly packed only the most necessary things and returned to Turkey to my family. I received psychological support for a long time after this incident, but even now I find it difficult to be alone even in my family's house. At night I am startled by the slightest sound, and that man's smiling face often haunts my dreams. I still can't figure out what happened in that house, but I will never set foot in that town again.